Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for storytelling purposes only. At exactly 11:07 p.m., under emergency briefing lights in a fortified federal command center, a senior intelligence officer delivered a statement that would shake every agency in the room. 3 coordinated shots fired within restricted proximity of the White House perimeter. 2 suspects neutralized, 1 escaped, and over 14 federal protocols breached in under 90 seconds. Washington, D.C. had not seen a breach this precise, this calculated in decades. Initial reports suggested a lone actor. They were wrong. Within hours, encrypted chatter intercepted by DHS surveillance grids pointed towards something far more dangerous: a deeply embedded network tied to a rising faction within a Mexican cartel operating on U.S. soil. This was not just an attack, it was a signal, and what investigators would uncover next would go deeper than anyone expected. Stay with this, because every layer gets darker. At 4:32 a.m., the streets of Arlington, Virginia, sat under a cold haze, the kind that muffles sound and hides movement. Neon reflections shimmered on wet asphalt as unmarked black SUVs rolled silently into position. Then, without warning, everything moved at once. FBI tactical units, DEA strike teams, ICE enforcement groups, and SWAT operators advanced in synchronized formation across 6 separate targets. A cartel-run nightclub disguised as a high-end lounge, a logistics warehouse masking a fentanyl pill-pressing operation, a suburban townhouse converted into a migrant smuggling hub. Doors were breached with controlled explosions. Flashbangs cracked the silence. Agents in full black tactical gear flooded interiors like shadows with purpose. Inside, suspects scrambled, duffel bags packed with cash, stacks of fentanyl pills scattered across tables, encrypted phones smashed in panic. One suspect tried to flee through a rear exit, only to be intercepted by ICE agents. Another reached for a weapon. He didn't get the chance. Within 18 minutes, the first wave was over. Over 320 kilograms of cocaine seized, 190 kilograms of heroin, nearly 2.4 million fentanyl pills packaged and ready for distribution, methamphetamine bricks stacked behind false walls. It was massive, but it wasn't the biggest discovery. In the basement of the warehouse, behind a reinforced steel door, agents found something else. Not drugs, not cash, servers, rows of them, running live, connected to offshore nodes. Alongside them, sealed containers filled with encrypted hard drives and a ledger written in coded financial shorthand. This wasn't just a cartel stash. This was infrastructure. This was command. By 7:55 a.m., inside a secure FBI cyber forensics lab in Quantico, analysts worked in controlled silence. Screens flickered with code. Encryption layers peeled back one by one. What emerged wasn't random data, it was a system, a network, a blueprint labeled under a code name, Operation Iron Veil. Lines stretched across digital maps linking shell corporations, fake nonprofit organizations, logistics firms, and restaurant chains spanning multiple states. Money flowed like invisible currents, from Texas to California, through offshore accounts in Panama and the Caribbean, then back into US-based assets. It was clean, too clean. Then came the key, a digital authorization signature embedded across multiple high-level transactions, not a cartel lieutenant, not a mid-level operator, a government-level clearance marker. The identity behind it stunned the room. Governor Elias Vorn, a respected political figure known publicly for his aggressive anti-crime stance. Privately, according to the data, he wasn't fighting the cartel, he was directing it. His encrypted approvals were linked to drug tunnel expansions near the southern border, migrant smuggling corridors disguised as humanitarian routes, and distribution hubs feeding narcotics into major cities. This was not corruption, this was command-level collusion. A sitting official had turned an entire state into a fortified drug empire hub, and the files suggested this was only phase 1. What came next would be worse, much worse. At 3:18 a.m. the following day, inside a joint federal command center, a massive digital map lit up the darkened room. Red markers pulsed across regions: Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, El Paso, Houston, each representing a node tied to Operation Iron Veil. Over 1,200 federal agents were already mobilized. 42 SWAT teams, armored vehicles staged, Black Hawk helicopters prepped for rapid deployment. Airspace monitoring intensified with F-15 patrols. The order was clear: full-scale eradication. Then it began. In the Arizona desert, a hidden drug superlab disguised as an abandoned agricultural facility was stormed. Inside, agents seized over 600 kilograms of methamphetamine mid-production. In the hills outside Los Angeles, a fortified mansion, nicknamed a drug fortress, was breached, revealing underground vaults packed with cocaine and weapons. Near the Texas border, a network of drug tunnels stretching over 2 miles was uncovered, complete with rail systems for rapid transport. In Houston, a human trafficking transit house was raided, dozens of victims freed, guarded by armed cartel members posing as security contractors. Simultaneously, a convoy suspected of migrant smuggling was intercepted on a remote highway. Inside, hidden compartments filled with fentanyl shipments. Every strike hit within minutes of each other. No warning, no escape. By sunrise, over 680 arrests had been made. Tons of narcotics seized. Millions in cash recovered. Entire communication hubs dismantled. The underworld took more damage in 6 hours than in the last 6 years. But the operation didn't stop there. As investigators combed through seized servers and internal logs, the deeper truth began to surface. Patrol records altered, border checkpoints deliberately understaffed during key transit windows, internal emails leaking raid schedules directly to cartel handlers. More than 80 law enforcement personnel across multiple agencies were flagged: officers, border agents, even a deputy chief, all receiving structured payments through layered financial channels. Some justified it as survival, others as opportunity, but the pattern was undeniable. An honest FBI agent reviewing the files reportedly sat back in silence for nearly a minute before speaking. This isn't infiltration, this is replacement. Federal teams moved quickly, arrests were made within departments, senior officers taken into custody in front of their own units. Badge by badge, the compromised network was dismantled. What they uncovered wasn't just corruption, it was a parallel enforcement system. A shadow police force answering not to the law, but to the cartel and its political architect. The system had been rewritten from within, and now it would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Zoom out further and the scale becomes even more unsettling. Operation Iron Veil wasn't confined to a single state. Data revealed distribution routes stretching coast to coast, trucking companies used as cover, agricultural shipments masking narcotics transfers, port cities facilitating international flow, shipping manifests altered with precision, way stations mysteriously shut down for maintenance exactly when cartel convoys passed through. Analysts estimated the network could move over 12 tons of narcotics per week without triggering federal alerts. Human trafficking routes overlapped with drug corridors, creating layers of distraction and protection. And then came the final file. Buried deep within the encrypted archive was a long-term strategic document. Phase 4, the objective was chilling. Transform the region into a permanent operational headquarters for cartel expansion, protected by political influence, economic leverage, and controlled enforcement. A shadow government, not temporary, not opportunistic, permanent. The realization hit hard. This wasn't a system that had been infiltrated. It was a system that had been redesigned for the cartel's future. In the aftermath, as arrests continued and investigations expanded, one truth stood clear. Power does not always arrive with violence. Sometimes it grows quietly, through silence, through ambition, through compromise, and by the time it reveals itself, it's already everywhere. The cost, measured not just in seized drugs or dismantled networks, but in lives lost to fentanyl overdoses, families broken by addiction, communities hollowed out by narcotics flooding their streets. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, each shipment carried consequences far beyond profit margins. This story, while fictional, reflects a very real warning. Organized crime does not just operate in the shadows, it seeks control of the light, and when it finds allies in power, the threat becomes something else entirely. If you are still watching, tap like so more people see this story, comment, expose. If you believe corruption like this should always be dragged into the light, because silence is where systems like this grow. And remember, this was a fictional dramatization created for storytelling purposes only.